I will kick it over to Rob Viola from New York City Department of Transportation.
Thanks so much, Fiona. I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to be speaking about our senior pedestrian safety study. So my name is Rob Viola. I work for the Department of Transportation. I'm the director of safety policy and research there, yeah, probably have met a lot of the attendees here through the years. Since I've been doing this work for about a decade over there. So we've been working on this study for the last few years, and are hoping to release soon this year, and wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we've discovered. All right. So some of the broad themes that we've uncovered that kind of weave throughout the report here. Really, senior pedestrians. Most things we looked into, senior pedestrians are pretty similar to younger pedestrians, but so it's not so much that they're being struck more often on our streets, but really that their injuries tend to be more severe when they happen, and these minor injuries can become fatal. Really, the total avoidance of the crash is the senior design goal, so to speak. Little different from other Vision Zero principles of if you can reduce the severity of a crash, then it can be a big win to avoid like the fatality. Some other broadly, reducing crossing distance, reducing exposure on the street, we found to be really key. And then also there is some evidence, that physical and cognitive decline, as we all know, as we get older, things slow down, and this does have a part in some of these injury profiles. But I will get into all the details of that as we go. Just as a little bit of background, we're building on some long-standing programs that we've had at DOT for years. Safe Streets for Seniors started back in 2008 and expanded a few times. And the main the programs had a few main goals: building street improvement projects where seniors live and where senior injuries are concentrated. And then also it's allowed us to get federal grant funding for those projects, for concrete construction, etc. And then also there's this education component that we've been doing the whole time with Safe Streets for Seniors, going to senior centers, about 150 a year. We've developed a number of educational materials, videos, etc. And it's also listening sessions for DOT to go and hear about the safety concerns of older New Yorkers. All right, so with that as kind of overview and background, I want to jump into some the initial findings from the study. So a lot of you probably know this already, but seniors are highly overrepresented in terms of pedestrian fatalities in New York City. They make up about 50% of pedestrian fatalities, but only 15% of the population. And that percentage has been expanding over time. And that's really because the pedestrian fatality numbers for younger New Yorkers has been dropping a lot faster than the senior number. Part of this is because the senior population of New York City is actually growing quite fast, 24% from 2010 to 2017. That surprised me a lot when I found that out, but it's actually not that different than the rest of the country. We're as a population, we're growing older. Risk for our senior pedestrians has declined over the study time period, but just less than younger adults. And yeah, you can see this shown here. That from 2010 to 2019, the number of senior pedestrian fatalities has been pretty flat, kind of hovering around 50, 55, while non-senior adult pedestrians with a peak in 2013 of 103, was 65 in 2019. Apologies for not having 2020 on here. And just a note on how I'm speaking about this in the presentation, most of the analysis here is seniors, people 65 and over, versus non-senior adults. So that means people between the ages of 25 and 64. We decided to look at, not to look at children or even young adults or the youngest adults, you might say, because we wanted to, compare seniors to people that were kind of mature, brain development stops after 25, etc. So when you look at pedestrians killed or severely injured, and you actually normalize this by population, by the population of seniors and then by the population of non-senior adults. So what we see is that both these groups are declining in risk. This is essentially a risk metric, right? How often per capita a pedestrian is killed or severely injured. So from 2010 to 2018, slight decline for seniors, but a much larger decline for non-senior adults. Almost a 20-30% decline. So that's really the issue, and this is why we're doing the study, is that Vision Zero is delivering a lot of benefits to New Yorkers, and most things are going down in terms of risk, but we haven't seen as much of a benefit being delivered to our seniors. Just in terms of like the distribution of the problem around the city, senior pedestrians are overrepresented in all the boroughs. If you look at, the column on the right is the percent of pedestrian fatalities that seniors account for in each borough. Manhattan is the highest, almost 50%. And that's because it's, the most pedestrian borough, right? And then also, actually, a lot of our oldest neighborhoods are in Manhattan, the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, et cetera. And at the kind of the bottom of the list in terms of the percent, Staten Island and the Bronx, Staten Island being more auto-oriented, and then the Bronx is actually the youngest borough. So, but really the seniors are overrepresented by at least 2 or 3 times in each borough. So it's really a problem everywhere that we need to be looking into. We did a literature review for this study. It's not always typical for these big DOT studies that we do, but this is a pretty well-studied issue throughout the rest of the country and the world, really. And there were definitely things that we couldn't investigate with our data that we wanted to look into. So some findings. We saw that from the literature, older pedestrians are not really struck more often than non-senior adults, but these injuries are more severe at any given speed. That low speed crashes are still quite dangerous. And one way of thinking about it is being struck at 20 miles per hour, that crash is 3 times more likely to kill a senior than a younger person. And that's a pretty slow crash. Almost all younger adults will survive that crash. There's also this idea of the 12 mile per hour rule of thumb. You can add 12 miles per hour to the crash, and that's a way of thinking about how much more severe it's going to be for someone 65 and up. In terms of crash risk itself, so older pedestrians are likely to underestimate the time they need to cross the street. It can be slight miscalculations of a few seconds or longer. There are demonstrated difficulties in judging the speed of oncoming traffic. That seems to get worse with age. And also difficulty scanning different directions of traffic. Just being able to kind of rotate back and forth to think about and kind of process the different directions at the same time. And this comes out in some of the crash results, left turns, reversing vehicles, wider two-way faster roads, complex intersections, all proven to be more dangerous for folks over 65 plus. So just more complex interactions. All right, so let's get into the crash analysis. This is the actual DOT work here, looking at New York City results. Just to let you know what we're looking at here in terms of time span, we looked at, it was 2010 to 2018, and this is using our state data mostly. Looking at, this is crash data we get back from New York State after it's been processed. All right, so this is a look at the severity issue, a little more in depth. So again, we're normalizing by per 100,000 population. So, because of course there's different amounts of seniors in the city versus non-seniors, and that per capita, the injury rate for seniors and non-senior adults is almost identical, 99 versus 104 per 100,000. But then when you start looking at severe injuries, that rate really starts to diverge. 11 versus 17, so it's a 50% difference. And then when you're looking at the fatality rate per 100,000, it's a 5-to-1 difference for seniors versus non-senior adults. So pretty stark. We also found interesting disparities for males and females, and this, this exists, in any population you look at for pedestrian fatalities, and it was just interesting to see that it still plays out for folks that are older. There is still that disparity for non-senior adults. It's about a 2-to-1 difference in fatalities per 100,000, and it's a bit less than that for older New Yorkers, but the senior males are still significantly overrepresented in terms of their likelihood of being involved in a fatality. Time of day was a particularly clear finding from the study, that seniors tend to be struck in the middle of the day. And you can see from the chart, the blue line is non-senior adults. You can see the dip in their injuries that happens during the workday, right? While senior pedestrians, kind of their risk increases throughout the day. Well, not their risk so much as their just the distribution of injuries, right? And we think this really represents activity patterns. If a lot of people are retired, they're not necessarily inside working during the day, out and about, more exposed to traffic. And then that distribution for seniors really drops away late night, as you would expect, not necessarily like hitting the clubs like younger folks might be. And and just one way of illustrating this is the average age of a pedestrian fatality is 37 at 3 in the morning, and it's 80 at noon in the middle of the day. Pretty big swing in the average there. This may change post-COVID as more people are working remotely. It'll be interesting to see how this distribution looks in a few years. These are some findings from the Department of Health that Lawrence, who spoke earlier today, I worked with him on this. So this distribution has been pretty constant through the years. I remember we've run these numbers in a few different studies through the years. That basically Asians are highly overrepresented in senior pedestrian fatalities. Latinos and non-Hispanic whites tend to be around the middle, and then Black New Yorkers are actually underrepresented in terms of senior pedestrian fatalities. And our feeling on this, when you look at the geographic distribution of the crashes and everything, is it seems to be mostly an expression of where people live in the city, and what the land use is around there, how much pedestrian activity versus car activity, etc. So yeah, pretty interesting though. And this is adjusted for the population of each group in the city, because there's definitely different amounts of seniors for the different race ethnicity groups. Another thing that, of course, DOT has emphasized through the years, as well as NYPD, as attacking this problem, is the kind of the failure to yield left turn issue. It's a big problem in kind of urban traffic safety in general, and in particular in New York. And as it turns out, this is actually a very big piece of the senior fatality and senior injury issue. So failure to yield, just meaning if a vehicle, someone is crossing the street and they have the walk signal, if the vehicle that's turning across that crosswalk doesn't yield to that pedestrian and strikes the pedestrian, that's a failure to yield crash. So these types of crashes account for more than a third of senior pedestrian fatalities, significantly more than for younger adults. And these left turn failure to yield crashes are twice as deadly for seniors than for younger adults. And you can see that on the chart on the right, just the percent of total of fatalities to injury for senior pedestrians. Yeah, this is kind of a big piece of the larger issue. Street width was another thing that we uncovered. The 60 to 70 foot wide streets have the highest severe injury rates for senior pedestrians, nearly double than for younger New Yorkers. And this was kind of interesting because it's not a linear relationship, with the streets getting more and more dangerous or higher severity as they get wider. We looked into this a little bit. And I think our operating theory is that there's a certain point where the street gets wider, where there's probably more caution used by the pedestrian, but then also as the street gets to a certain width, really over 70 feet or so, at least in New York, the streets are much more likely to have a pedestrian island, which means it's somewhere to stop and wait. And so really your crossing is not a 80-foot crossing. It's going to be two 30-foot crossings, two 40-foot crossings, etc. So that's our operating theory on that. And then a grab bag of a few other findings. We found that backing vehicles are overrepresented for senior pedestrians in terms of those fatal crashes, 2 times the younger adult rate. Very small piece of the pie, only 6%, but there was a big difference. And we did see it in our literature review as well. These were crashes that mainly occurred at mid-block. So kind of crossing a street in between 2 parked cars was the kind of profile of the crash. When the pedestrians actually expire from their injuries, it's different for younger adults versus seniors. 3/4 of younger adults that are struck are going to be DOA, like died on the scene or just right after the crash. But most seniors actually end up dying at the hospital or later in terms of those pedestrian fatalities. So again, it's part of that story of a smaller, sort of a lower speed, a less intense crash, but leads to deadly injuries. Not necessarily the immediate trauma of the event. And then a note on bikes is that there's a lot of concern, often from the community, about dangers to bicyclists, to older pedestrians from bicyclists. And, just in general, in terms of when you look at all injuries to New Yorkers and to seniors, it's about 95, 98% of injuries are from motor vehicles. Few percent are from cyclists. So that's the real breakdown. But just interesting tidbit, kind of more seniors are actually injured and killed while biking than being struck by a cyclist. So 177 versus 406. So feel like just that was a kind of a little bit of a counterintuitive or surprising finding. So safety. So the other big part of our study is our safety treatment evaluation. And what this was a deep dive into all the DOT safety treatments that we have been installing over the last decade that we really ramped up during Vision Zero. And we've analyzed the efficacy of these treatments in a number of different ways. But this was just a real chance to go through and look at everything and see what was effective in general, but also what was most effective for our seniors. So we found that the things that really worked seemed to have 4 characteristics: treatments that slowed vehicle speeds, usually by reducing the amount of space for motor vehicles, reducing pedestrian exposure. So that means, shorter crossings or just treatments that restrict vehicle movements. So there's less exposure of the pedestrian to traffic. Treatments that slow turns. When turning crashes happen, they're going to be at slower speeds or they're going to be avoided altogether. Apology for the siren in the background, if you can hear that. And then providing pedestrian refuge is the 4th kind of quality that we saw again and again in the treatments that were effective. So just really having a place to stop while crossing the roadway. All right, so the first treatment is the road diet, which is really a set of treatments, right? It's taking a roadway, often 4-lane street, turning it into a 2-lane street with a turn lane, so 3 lanes really, reallocating some of that space to bike lanes, parking lanes, a bus lane, could be anything. And we found for senior pedestrians, injuries dropped 17% at these locations, and then severe injuries dropped by 35%. And that was the same for our non-senior adult pedestrians. So this was one of the most dramatic declines, the road diet. Conventional bike lanes, also quite effective, with a 21% drop in pedestrian KSI. And these are just the bike lanes that are just paint on the street, nothing, no physical barrier at these locations. But the traffic calming qualities of shrinking the roadway and some reduction in exposure here for the conventional bike lanes turned out to be really helpful for our senior pedestrians. Our protected bike lanes, which of course is like one of our premier treatments and something that we are always trying to build more of, and the advocates are always demanding that we build more of, which is great. This was one of the highest reductions in KSI for seniors, with a 36% drop, also a 20% drop in injuries where these are located. And protected bike lanes, similar to the road diet, it's really a combination treatment. You're talking about shrinking the roadway, less space for motor vehicles, shorter crossing distances, and also there's often pedestrian islands employed along with protected bike lanes. So I think that's why we see that kind of a powerful result. Pedestrian islands just themselves, we looked at them kind of separately. Just a note on methodology, there is overlap between these groups. We're not able to separate them out completely. But pedestrian islands, when just looking at where those were installed, we get 30% drop in pedestrian KSI, 20% drop in injury. Even better results for our non-senior adult pedestrians, with a 41% drop in pedestrians killed or severely injured. Curb and sidewalk expansions, just, you know, pulling out the curb, adding either concrete or painted pedestrian area to a corner, or could be the edge of a sidewalk. We also saw drops here, 16% drop in KSI for seniors, and a 23% drop in injury. Also really powerful results for our non-seniors. And turn calming. Now this is a newer program, and it used to be called left turn traffic calming. Now we just call it turn calming because we've been putting right turn treatments in, and these are temporary treatments. Well, they're not temporary. I should not use that term, but they are non-concrete. They're light materials, plastic, rubber speed bumps, plastic bollards, some markings that we do put in to either harden the center line or to build out a little box or wedge that vehicles have to turn around. So it's a very light, easy to install treatment, doesn't really take away road capacity. We were shocked to see the results at these locations, the 60% drop in pedestrian KSI for seniors at these locations. It's a small, the sample's on the small side, but big enough that we felt we could include it. Yeah, and also a nice reduction in injuries for our non-senior adults. So yeah, very encouraging, especially since, again, it's such a light and easy to install treatment. And then our last big safety treatment evaluation is leading pedestrian intervals. For people that don't know, it's a pedestrian head start where we give the pedestrian the walk sign before the vehicles can go and before they can turn across that crosswalk where the pedestrian is walking. We've seen great results from LPIs in the past, but we've installed many thousands of LPIs since the beginning of Vision Zero, something like maybe 5,000 to 6,000, something on that order of magnitude. At these locations, we saw a 41% drop in senior pedestrian KSI. Senior pedestrians killed or severely injured, dropping 41% where LPIs were installed. Again, this is an incredible finding. We think every municipality in America should be rolling these out. They're cheap, they're almost invisible, and really just requires a small change to signal timing. And those are better injury results than you get from a lot of redesign projects where you're actually redesigning the entire road. So just incredible to see that, and really hopeful. All right, so let's quickly dive into the action plan. How am I doing on time?
You have 1 minute left.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay, I didn't get my 2-minute warning. Okay, so very
Put it
quickly.
in the chat.
Yeah. Well, I only have 1 minute, so I'll go very quickly just to sum up. We created a new map of senior pedestrian zones where these are the areas around the city that are highest in senior population and in senior injuries. It's a rate, and that's where our interventions are going to be focused. We're going to be doing senior-focused street redesign projects, combining LPIs with turn calming. We have a new LPI design that gives more crossing time in the middle of the day, because that's when seniors are being struck more. So, and then we're going to be focusing education and enforcement initiatives in these zones, as well as a number of other engineering improvements that we've been doing through the years. And I guess maybe I'll just highlight that we're also going to be working with medical providers on senior pedestrian outreach. We did some initial work on this. We need to follow up after the release of the report because we think this is a new opportunity for messaging to actually go through doctors and other medical professionals, model the program on fall prevention, which is something the Department of Health has a lot of experience with. And I think I'll leave it at that. All right, thanks very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Rob. And I'm sorry that it was a 1 minute warning and not a 2 minute as
Oh,
planned.
that's all right.
We do have time for questions now. So if you have a question, you can take yourself off mute. You can try it that way, or you can raise your hand by hitting the reactions button and then hit raise your hand. One quick note, we have a lot of people in the meeting showing up under the name of Kathleen Meow. If you could rename yourself, hover over your name in the participants box, hit the more button and rename, please. All right, we'll wait for questions. I'm sure somebody has one.
Yes, I do.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, my name is Darius. So I do a lot of biking in New York, and one of the things that I find is that the bike paths are inherently dangerous because the bicycles are riding right along the vehicles. A lot of the bike lanes, even if they're painted. Whereas the green bike lanes are a lot safer because you're not riding along the vehicles. Has there been any thought or put into just like redesigning the bike lanes?
Darius, can you share your affiliation with us, please?
Oh yeah, I'm a city research scientist at the Department of Buildings.
Thank you.
So, in a perfect world of very wide streets and very low traffic, and unlimited installation resources, DOT would install a protected bike lane for every bike lane, that we did across the city. But unfortunately, we don't quite live in that universe. So certainly, it's our preference to do protected bike lanes. But we found that the traditional bike lanes that are just like you just described as just a painted lane alongside of traffic. They are not as safe as protected bike lanes, but they actually do increase cyclist safety. They lower cyclist risk. We actually have a study on that should be coming out at some point. We do feel that it's still very beneficial to create those facilities, to expand the network, to encourage cycling, which of course is one of the biggest things that makes cycling safer, is just safety in numbers. So.
Thanks for asking. And thanks, Rob, for replying. Next up is Sam from City Council. I've asked you to unmute. Hopefully you can.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, good morning. Can you be more specific around the reasons why there's such a huge disparity between Black New Yorkers and Asian and Pacific Islander New Yorkers in that chart you were showing with seniors? I forget the exact metric that it was displaying.
Yeah, it was pedestrian fatalities per 100,000 population.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we can't say for sure, but it seems to be related to where folks live. So, because where you live in the city is, it's more likely, depending on where you live, you're more or less likely to walk, more or less likely to drive. You have different exposure to different kinds of traffic, high speed, low speed. So it seems to be related to that. But I mean, it could be related to other things. Just behavior of older people, whether they're out and about more or not, or whether they're being driven places, or taking different modes of transportation. We don't really know for sure, but yeah, those are the stats.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for your question.